Everybody, it really is such a pleasure to have you here. I've been missing people, and especially to see who is really involved in what's going on. So we thought it would be lovely to have you meet some of our strongest warriors in these COVID wars this evening. I know very well that there are many others, but we're introducing 4 of them to you this evening. And as you well know, their weapons are truth, honesty, courage, experience, and energy. Some years ago, an advocate said to Herman in court, he loves an expert with the glint of battle in his eye. And I can tell you, these people do have the glint of battle in their eye. And they really are taking on some pretty big subjects and companies. I want to use this opportunity to thank Gerhard Papenfus from NEASA, who made the size of this meeting possible, because our Zoom facility here has a limited number of people. And Gerhard made it possible for us to have an unlimited group. And I see we are happily on 147 people already. And my request is, please spread this word far and wide. We will make the recording available to you. And so whomever is interested, please let the good work be spread further. The format this evening, as you may have gathered from our notice, we will have 4 speakers, each for about 10 minutes. And then there are 2 other shorter contributions. Hopefully, if we can get Catherine's sound right, or otherwise you'll phone us and we'll get you on a WhatsApp call here. And then I think the other person was Dr. Leonis van Rooyen, who also needed to or wanted to say a few words. And after that, we will have questions and discussion. We ask that you please put your hand up, and we will take in order of your requests coming through. The meeting is from 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. And hopefully we will finish on time so that it doesn't drag on industry. But I can see from the involvement and the number of people who already try to connect on Zoom from Sunday, we have huge enthusiasm, and we may well be with some people not having all their questions answered. But what I do think is that if you are prepared to email the questions to me or even WhatsApp them on our health awareness group, then we can put them to our panelists if that becomes necessary.
Can I just interrupt you for a moment? Of course, you can put questions in the chat, or you can WhatsApp them to Hanneke. But I think it is preferable for people to put their hand up and ask the question.
No, but I meant afterwards, if they don't get airtime this evening, because I can imagine that there are more questions than time.
Good.
Okay, so over to you, Herman.
Thank you very much, Hanneke, for organizing this. And again, thank you to Gerhard. My Zoom license that enabled this has got a maximum of 100 participants. Today, Gerhard paid to increase it from 100 to 500. And there are already 183. So had Gerhard not done that, the last 83 people wouldn't have been able to join the meeting. So thank you very much for that, Gerhard of NEASA. It's a tremendous honor for me to talk in such this panel. Gerhard Papenfus is the Chief Executive of the National Employers Association of South Africa. And I think everybody here probably knows the important and supportive role that Gerhard has been contributing to the promotion of human rights, the promotion of health in South Africa, and resisting the harmful effects that are being put on us. The second speaker is going to be Dr. Stephen Schmidt. He is a very strong ally and professional friend and colleague. He is a physician and gastroenterologist who has the particularly relevant qualification and experience of having been a drug trialist for many years, and also had to have done vaccine trials as principal investigator. So Stephen knows in and out the the business of doing drug trials, what the requirements are, what the clinical practice are, what the rules are, and he knows better than any of us how these rules have been flaunted. Now, Stephen will talk about the trials and the breaking of the rules. I will talk primarily about vaccine safety and efficacy from a medical perspective. But then we are really very fortunate to have Johann Holm, who is a professor of engineering and risk management at the Northwest University. And Johann has advanced skills and academically of developing and teaching risk assessment and risk management. And it is very interesting that from Stephen's perspective in trials, my perspective in medicine, and Johann's perspective in risk analysis, and Gerhard's perspective in business, we all come to the same conclusion. And the fact that 4 people from such different backgrounds can come to the same conclusion simply by the application of looking at facts and rational interpretation lends tremendous weight to the validity of these findings. So without any further ado, I hand over to Gerhard Papenfus.
Thank you, Herman, and thank you, Hanneke. Just a few words on NEASA, just to give a bit of perspective on what we do before we get to what we've done in this particular case. NEASA is an organization whose entire purpose is to serve the interests of business. On individual ground floor level, individual businesses in the context of industry, sector businesses per sector, but also national and even onto the parliamentary level, where we lobby and take government to court where there's hostile legislation. So our purpose is to make it easier for business to create a business-friendly environment in a very hostile environment. And then came COVID, and initially we did not express ourselves on the appropriateness of the vaccines. We made up our mind in our head office that we're not going to do that. But we did not think it was appropriate for us to tell business what they should do. Although on the issue of the appropriateness of the vaccines, I was eventually and over time dragged into that debate. And then the issue of the mandates arose, and that's where NEASA really entered into the battle. Prior to April 2022, there were the previous regulations that existed under the state of disaster and the health regulations under the state of disaster. And it was in that period, I think it was somewhere through the course of last year, that BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, which we cross swords on many occasions on other issues, and we more or less do not agree with them on anything, declared that they wanted to go to approach the High Court to get a declarator in respect of the appropriateness of the enforcing of the mandates. I called the CEO of BUSA and I informed him personally, and then later on in a letter to BUSA and to NETLAC and to the Minister of Labour to inform them that if that declarator was to be brought, NEASA would have entered the battleground. We told them that we're going to fight that issue, and so needless to say, they never brought that application. They simply just continued on poor legal advice. They clearly had no appetite for a legal battle on the appropriateness of these vaccines. The regulations that existed at that time under the Disaster Management Act and the health regulations under the Disaster Management Act did not put any obligation on employers. And NEASA therefore could not challenge these codes, the code. There simply was no room. We had no Lakistani in court because business were not forced by government to do anything. The code at that stage was merely a guideline. However, when the state of disaster was lifted in April, the minister issued a new code, and this code put obligations on business, and the whole thrust of the new code was towards vaccination. The onus was on business to make out a case why not to vaccinate. And the moment they put an obligation on business, NEASA entered the fray, and we filed in April an application in the High Court. And in this application, we asked the court many things. And I'm just going to go through this very quickly. We first of all point out that this code is not consistent with the Labour Relations Act and therefore unlawful and irrational and unreasonable. And we challenge the appropriateness or the constitutionality of this code on 8 grounds. I'm not going to mention them. I'll deal with that if there are any questions on that. We also asked the court to declare that a code cannot confer a right on an employer to enforce upon an employee a scheme of mandatory vaccination. We also asked the court to declare that any scheme of mandatory vaccination in contradiction of voluntary and informed consent is unconstitutional, unlawful, and invalid. We also asked the court to declare that no employment policy or risk assessment plan may exclude or refuse a person's right to bodily integrity, may refuse or exclude a person's right to make an informed decision, may refuse to or recognize a person's right to refuse medical treatment, including the vaccination, or to penalize or dismiss a person for refusing to undergo any form of medical treatment, including this vaccination. You'll recall that in that code, the COVID was declared a hazardous biological agent, which was entirely ridiculous. Well, it still is. We therefore also requested the court to declare that the hazardous biological agents regulations published under the Occupational Health and Safety Act only apply to circumstances where SARS-CoV-2 is produced, processed, used, handled, stored, or transported, and that nothing in that regard, which occurred in other workplaces which didn't deal with this SARS-CoV-2, didn't apply in other workplaces, so it didn't apply. Now, if you look at workplaces where SARS-CoV-2 is produced, processed, used, handled, stored, or transported, it would have been sufficient and entirely appropriate to apply that regulation on the Wuhan laboratory, but not in a normal workplace. We also asked the court to declare that various sections of the regulations are in contravention of the Occupational Health and Safety Act and therefore unlawful. The regulations was, although introduced in terms of the Labour Relations Act, it was based on the Occupational Health and Safety Act. On the 23rd of June this year, 2 important interventions took place. First of all, the Minister of Health withdrew the health regulations, stating that COVID-19 was no longer a general health risk. On the same day, the Minister of Labour admitted that the code which he introduced in April was unlawful. However, the next day, the minister introduced a new code with exactly the same content, but this time under the auspices of NEDLAC. But of course, between the lifting of the previous regulations and the new regulations, NEDLAC did not have the time to consider that the Minister of Health has already stated that there was no longer a general health risk. Notwithstanding, they issued exactly the same regulations. So what it means that according to the Minister of Health, if you are outside of a workplace, in any space, in a sports stadium, in Pick and Pay, wherever, there's no health risk. However, the moment you walk into a workplace, according to the Minister of Labour, there all of a sudden is a health risk. Now that doesn't make sense at all. So we are going back to court. I hope that we'll be able to file this new application within days. Our legal team is on the verge of producing the final product. We will raise the same grounds as was the case previously, plus new grounds, because now we are in possession of the record which the minister considered in making his decision. And so we've got a stronger case. We also in this process bring a constitutional challenge against NEDLAC for their, which they reckon their power to make a decision of this nature. NEDLAC is not an elected body. They're not a democratically elected body, and they assume the powers of Parliament. Now, just in short, is that there's COVID-19, the enforcing of the mandatory vaccinations. There's no law of general application here. So you're not, in terms of the Constitution, in terms of the Labour Relations Act and equity legislation, you cannot discriminate against a person except in terms of a law of general application. For instance, in terms of the Employment Equity Act, you can discriminate against a person on the basis of that person's color of his skin. Now, whether you like it or not, the fact is you can, because there's an act adopted by Parliament that approves it. Parliament did not approve any legislation that you can discriminate against a person on the basis of whether you're having received a vaccine or underwent any form of medical treatment. What the government has done is to delegate that authority to a businessman, any businessman. Employing two people, businessman can enforce mandatory vaccinations on two persons sitting at the back of his bakkie. That is entirely ridiculous. So we're on our way to court. We will not be able to bring an urgent application. That will fail, but we will try to bring this on a semi-urgent basis. If it wasn't for the fact that the minister admitted the previous regulations to be, or the code to be unlawful, we may have been in court by September. Now, this is now delayed. So I look forward to this, and our position is that we're protecting the right of employees here. If you allow for somebody to be discriminated against in a nation, you are not doing what you're supposed to do. And in this case, we have taken the responsibility on ourselves to say, in this case, we not only fight for the right of business, but for the right of each and every employee. The fact is, for us, COVID is over. Yes, Herman.
Hanneke is prodding me because the time is running out. Can I just ask you, before we move on to Stephen, can you just tell the meeting something about your activities against discovery?
Well, it's not only my activities. Well, it just happened to be that I was in a debate with Discovery a while ago. I was invited as a speaker on a particular platform, and there were two people, the head of human resources and the chief doctor. And so the COVID issue came up, and that was quite an interesting debate. But between the four of us sitting here, we are now driving Discovery into a corner, and they have certain things to answer. They made certain statements in public, so they will at some point, and not too far a point in the future, they will have to answer all these points also in public. I think they're very much worried, and we're not going to drop this ball. We're going to keep them busy until they answer everything. And they are enemy number one. They've declared that they adopted a leading position in getting mandatory vaccinations introduced in South Africa. So they will have to answer for that, and very soon. Thank you, Herman. Thank you, Hanneke.
Thank you, Gerhard. Thank you.
I'm sure there are going to be many questions for you, Gerhard, in the discussion. So to tell people more about the fight, but let's hear from Stephen now about the trials. But you must unmute, Boet.
One would think that I should know by now, right? Hanneke and Herman and Gerhard and Johann, everyone, thank you very much for this opportunity, even though it was a short notice, but I'm used to it by now. I'm going to be as quick as I possibly can. My mandate is not bragging, is probably the most complicated one of them all because it's very technical. So I try to, what I'm going to try and do is put a little bit of a positive spin on this. And I'm going to explain myself. Can I share my screen, Hanneke?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
You all see that?
Yes, vindication and the Overton window.
Vindication and the Overton window. Now, I must say, as I'm sitting here, I'm going to be unashamedly telling you that I'm absolutely exhausted for various reasons. But the main reason why is that I had the fun or the opportunity yesterday of looking into the mouth of the beast, because I was in a hearing on the Health Professional Council of South Africa, who is on my case for a very simple little misdemeanor that I was charged for. But there's one thing. I really tried to keep my temper. I did well. The lawyer said I controlled myself well, which is cool. But there's one thing I noticed.
Stephen, I'm going to interrupt you there because you gave the impression that you committed a misdemeanor. And that is not so at all. Stephen Schmidt is hauled before the HPCSA because he asked one of his patients who had been vaccinated, "Madam, having been vaccinated, why do you want to wear a mask?" That was all. She didn't take off the mask. She didn't answer him. But then she went to the HPC and laid a complaint. It's a completely frivolous complaint. So just that you don't give the impression you might have done something wrong, Stephen.
Yeah. I know I didn't do anything wrong. I would have done a gastroscopy on the next morning, and it would have been a problem putting the scope into a mouth through a mask. So that is I honestly mean it when I say from the get-go, from the very first word, it was an aggressive encounter. And why I'm mentioning this is there was one point where this very arrogant chairperson asked me a very, very uncomfortable question, and I pushed back very gently. The lawyer said that I looked a little bit hot under the collar, but I thought I was quite cool. And I looked into his eyes and I saw doubt, because I spoke sense. I spoke fact and I spoke sense, and I saw doubt, and that was very encouraging. And then when I thought how I was going to approach what I was going to say tonight, I used this topic of vindication in the Overton window. So let me explain. This slide that I want to show you is extremely important. It's something that I want you to, I can give it to you in whatever form, something I want you to remember. This is scientific evidence, the hierarchy of scientific evidence. So I come from a trial point of view. In fact, I worked with Pfizer as a subcontractor for 10 years. I did vaccine studies not so long ago. I was offered this vaccine study. I was turned down because I had questions that I asked about the safety profiles of the drug. So I know exactly how they work. Level 1 evidence is the top of the pyramid, refers to the randomized control studies. The very tip of the pyramid would be a meta-analysis of these studies. In other words, a whole lot of these randomized control studies collected and then analyzed. That is what we use to tell or to use evidence-based medicine to argue a point. This is the real thing. If you look at the bottom at level 5 evidence, then this is the kind of argument that the discoveries and the standard banks and the Twitter experts would use. Expert opinion, I am of the opinion, there is evidence that. But if you look at the top, the only time that you can really say that something is really factual, it is if you can show through a randomized control study that it is shown that because you have the data. So I'm a little bit of a pain for the likes of Herman Edeling, because from the get-go, I said, this is where the answer lies, right at the beginning of the whole thing. This is a star witness. If this was a trial, if this is a legal trial, then this would be the star witness. This would be the eyewitness. And if you can discredit the eyewitness, the case is lost. So just remember this little pyramid, it's very important. The Overton window, I'm sure a lot of you people know exactly what it is. It's an interesting concept of what the popular opinion is in any event, especially with regards to politicians and the media. So it is the popular opinion, and the Overton window can shift. At the moment, the Overton window has got completely radical towards all these gender-based issues and all the strange things that you see. I even saw something today on Twitter where someone was trying to explain to us why it would be good to become a cannibal in future. And the reason why I'm mentioning the Overton window is because I believe that the Overton window is in a shift. If you look at this little graph that I put you now, what you see in the little square is what we are shown. Can you hear me?
Can hear you.
Yes, Stephen, we do hear you.
Okay, cool. What you see through the little window is through the square is the window. So it's popular, it's policy, and that is what is shown by the media, and that is what's told to us by the politicians. This is where you have to look. Now they can move that little window to the left to the completely unthinkable and the radical, which they are busy doing at the moment. But the Overton window says what the politician is going to use to get his voters in the next election, and what the media is going to use to have more viewers. Now, look at this little jobby here. Okay, so at the moment, everything is popular. If we look through the little red square, then we see the kinds of opinions you see on CNN, ECNA, the politicians, all the major people, all the major role players are making us look through a little window and seeing a certain thing. On the left of that, there are the issues of poor testing, fraudulent trials, poor efficacy of vaccination, poor safety, WHO, WF, that's not now, it's a new world order. And that is being put aside. That's conspiracy. Those people are crazy. They're fringe people. They get censored. So let's ignore them. But in the last week or two, just see what happened. I actually think that little window is slowly shifting across, because you can notice things like Mr. Tucker Carlson, who's not my personal friend, but certainly in Fox News, all of a sudden this man is talking about stuff that Herman Edeling and I was talking about a year ago, like the PCRs, like the vaccine injuries, like the fraudulent trials. They are mentioning it now. And remember one thing, Tucker Carlson is not going to take on an unpopular topic because he needs viewers. So he is busy taking advantage of a shift in the whole narrative. That is my belief. Another guy is Mark Stein. I don't know if you've seen him, or Stein. I've seen him on GB News. He's very, very straight to the point, and he's saying the real thing. I believe that there is a shift. Because of the first slide that I showed you, that we must look at evidence-based medicine, I want to just quickly do a little summary of the phase 3 trial. Now, you have to understand the phase 3 trial is the start of the whole thing. So the phase 3 trial, I can quickly summarize into certain things. I call it the lie or the fraud. Usually there are 3 phases to vaccine development. In this specific case, the first studies, the animal studies, most of the animals died. Phase 1 study, which is voluntary studies in the beginning, was never done. Phase 2 studies were rushed. In fact, they were telescoped with phase 3 studies, which I will show you now as flawed and fraudulent. In vaccine development, normally it takes 10 to 15 years to develop a safe vaccine. This was done in months. In fact, it was probably done longer, but as far as the story goes, they developed it in the time after COVID was announced. We know that the so-called vaccine is directed at a virus long gone. We know that the formula has not been changed. We know that the ingredients are unknown. The indications are there that it's not effective, neither safe. And the one thing I need to say is that in 30 years of doing trial work, of being a principal investigator, working with the likes of Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and all these people, Novavax, I did a vaccine study with Novavax, is we followed extremely strict, good clinical practice, which are clinical guidelines that is written by SAPRA, and we also followed strict clinical guidelines that is written by the DOH, and it was written in 2015. We had to write exams every 2 years to follow these guidelines. They were extremely strict with us. All of that, the entire ethical principle of medicine that I practiced for 30 years in trial work has completely gone. So this is what happened in our country. Famously, our government said we will not mandate vaccines. So what they did was they told the Department of Health, listen here, we have to have a 70% vaccination rate. They went and said to SAPRA, listen, SAPRA, you guys go along and you authorize this for us. SAPRA is completely, I must be gentle now. Let's just say they can't do the job. They're not resourced to do the job, and they can't do the job. All right, 10 minutes is over. Just give me some time here. So SAPRA follow certain guidelines of quality, safety, and control. What SAPRA do is they align with the European Medical Agency, which is the European body that actually took the application for the vaccine from BioNTech and from Pfizer. And the EMA, basically, they considered the application from Pfizer and others. They based the decision on the phase 3 trial, and they authorized the therapy. Right, so what SAPRA did was, they didn't do their own studies. They relied completely on the EMA. They didn't do any local studies. Safety, quality, batch control was not done. Interestingly enough, Hungary and India challenged Pfizer on these findings, and and Pfizer left both of them alone. So corporates, universities, sport bodies, as far as I'm concerned, is either told to or paid to or conforms to forced vaccination on healthy people by coercion and threat of dismissal. And honestly and truly, this is based on poor data, a suggestion of fraud, and certainly we are being lied about. Can I go on, Herman? I've got a few more slides.
Sorry, yes, sir. Please finish, Stephen.
Shall I explain this? Okay, so this is the trial. Quickly, the inadequate trial design of the phase 3 study. Remember, the phase 3 study is the study that determined everything around this authorization. The beginning, the choosing of the patients were poor, and I thank Deanna McLeod for this. She gave me permission to use the slides. So they used healthy people, they excluded high-risk people, they excluded pregnant people, they excluded all the people that they are pushing the vaccine onto after the fact. They compared it to people.
Can I just interrupt you there for one moment? Just to inform everybody that this phase 3 trial that Stephen and Deanna McLeod are referring to is the famous trial on the basis of which the FDA awarded emergency use authorization. This was the trial that the authors found that the vaccine was 95% effective. That figure of 95% was blurted all over the world. And now Deanna McLeod's analysis, which Stephen is going to show you, will show how wrong that was.
So what they did was they took healthy people over the age of 16 and they excluded all the comorbids and the pregnant people and the pregnant women. Sorry for the people part. Oh man, that was a slip. And pregnant women. And they have now targeted them after the fact, which is completely crazy. They compared them to people who were not sick before and didn't have any kind of treatment. And that is wrong. If you compare one group to the other, you have to compare to standard of care. So the comparator group should have been people who had previous infection or would have had access to off-label medication, antiviral medication, ivermectin, hydrochloroquine, or all those kinds of things. So that is also flawed. Then they went and selected the famous PCR test, which you just know is a bunch of nonsense, so I'm not going to spend time on that. And if you look at it, this trial was not designed by its endpoints. The endpoint means what you achieve to make the analysis on. It was not designed to address the impact on the vulnerable populations because they were excluded. It was not designed to measure hospitalization or death because it simply wasn't an endpoint. It was not designed to look at duration of response. It was not designed to look at the benefit in COVID-19 recovered. They excluded them, and it was not designed to assess a spread of disease. Just a quick part on this. On the left, whichever way you look at it, is how it is supposed to happen. You have two groups. And yes, it is an experiment. It's an experiment by the emergency authorization document. It runs until December 2023. I have that on record. It should have gone on to 2023 in the two different groups. But what they did was, after 2 months over here, they crossed over. So now they offered all the people who was in the saline or the placebo group, they offered them vaccination. In other words, from then onwards, after 2 months, there's absolutely no data. So no safety analysis can be done. Just quickly on this is what Herman just spoke about. So what you have here is you have the vaccine group and you have the placebo group. What they did here was to say that it was 91% effective. What they did was they took that figure and they took that figure and they compared them. What it actually means is that's called the relative risk. I'll explain it now. It actually means is it's only a 4% absolute risk. Because if you look at this, only 850 people out of 21,000 actually got symptomatic. The other important thing here is if you look at the vaccine group, look at everything in red here. These are adverse events. These are the bad things happening. 300% more than the placebo group, 75% more than the placebo group, 10% more than the placebo group. If you summarize this slide, you had between 0.1 and 4% effect with up to 300% side effect. This should have been stopped right here. I did a lot of trials. This should have been stopped right here. Our quickly want to explain relative and absolute risk. This is a rugby thing. So you have coach A who plays 100 games and wins 1 game. That's a 1% percentage win. You have coach B plays 100 games, wins 2 games. That's a 2% win. So what Pfizer is saying is that is 100% better. This vaccine is 100% effective. When in fact, if you take the 2 games and you subtract the 1 game, you get a 1%. This is the true parameter, absolute risk, not relative risk. I'm going to skip the kids. I just want to point out one thing here. It was a very small group, but look at this table here, this row. Severe cases in the children's studies, not. There were no severe cases.
Thank you. Good. Bye-bye.
This is something that someone has to challenge at some stage or other. There was massive conflict of There was massive conflict of interest in the study. And if you just look at these figures of the people, everything in red here were people that were being paid or benefit from the study. And I could just tell you one interesting little thing. If I wasn't as harakat as I was when I was offered the trial, my name would have been there in blue. And there is a South African in that little block of blue. Fortunately, they were not conflicted. I'm going to skip that. I just want to quickly point this one out, and I really believe this is something that you people must use in your everyday language when people talk about efficacy. This is a very, very complicated study, and I'm going to be honest and say I'm going to brag that I spent a lot of time trying to analyze this. I listened to Dr. Bean. He explained it to me very nicely. Very complicated study done in Qatar, over 1.5 million people. And what they went and looked at is they went and compared unvaccinated to vaccinated people. And look at the results. It looks complicated. I'm going to explain it. So what we do here is we completely ignore the Delta phase, and we completely ignore the first vaccine. So concentrate just on this little line here. At the beginning of Omicron, in Qatar, so the excellent database, 46% of people who had had 1 vaccine dose was infected, was protected, 46%. That dwindled down to only 10% in 3 months. And it dwindled down to a negative figure in 7 months. From 46% right down to negative. 3 months. They were then boosted and had an immediate little jump up to 59% protection against the virus. And after just 1 month, it dropped down to 40%. And the projection is that it would go right down to the same amount, same figure again after 3 months. In other words, a person who went through the first phases of COVID, who had 1 vaccine, had 3 months protection with a second dose and 3 months protection with a booster. Compare that to hopefully most of us on this call. At the beginning of this same in the unvaccinated group, after Delta, 80% of unvaccinated people were protected. 80. After a 7-month period, that went up to 90%. And after 15 months, it went to 70%. And I can extend this graph to right up to 2 years, where it goes down to only 40%. These are the Delta people. This figure here are the Omicron people. So they started around about 35%, and after 15 months, they're at 10%. So, in summary, if you had the previous vaccine and all your little habby-jabbies, it takes 3 months and you need another one. 3 months and you need another one. If you had Delta, you are protected for at least 3 years. If you didn't have Delta and had Omicron, you are at least protected for 15 months. I'm finished. I believe a change is coming.
That is
Thank you.
fantastic,
That
Stephen.
was
And Stephen,
you.
I want to say that there's been great interest in your presentation, and we've been getting chat messages that it's too important to cut you short. So thank you very much for presenting such crucial information. I'm sure there will be questions for more information in the discussion. So with that, we hand over to our non-mathematician, but engineer expert on risk analysis, Johann Holm.
Thanks, Dr. Edeling. Let me just see if I can share the slide with you. I don't know if it's actually being shared at this point in time. Do you see the background? Do you see the slide?
We don't see
Not
it yet.
Okay, let
But
me
you
just
do
see if
have
I can do that.
Charts coming up.
There we
All
go.
right.
Yes, see it now, Johann.
Now I'll just see if I can actually now. There we are. All right. So all the wonderful information that Dr. Schmidt has given us gives us some food for thought. And my job is to see if I can translate this into something that I can understand, at least to begin with. But I have to just clarify something before I start. This is what I'm telling you today is my own opinion, and I'm not conveying the opinion of anyone else other than my own. So we need to talk about the background risk first. We need to understand what the risk is. So when we deal with risk, we look at a number of important factors, but mostly we look at the likelihood of an event taking place, and then the impact of that event on whatever the risk event affects. It could be a person, it could be a vehicle, it could be anything. So any risk event that takes place, the likelihood times the impact. So for example, if I were to walk on a wet pavement and I would fall, it would be fairly likely. And the fall might not be severe. If I were to get run over by a vehicle that skidded on the road because of the wet road, then I would probably end up in hospital. Both were skidding events, but or sliding events, if you like, but the one is far more severe, and the one is also more likely than the other. So I can have 100 falls, and I might, versus one incident with a vehicle, and the impact could be the same if we look at it out of context. If we put it in context, then the 100 falls remain a low impact in the end, in total. But the one incident with a vehicle, because of the consequence being much higher, would be a severe incident. So just bear that in mind, that there's the likelihood that something could take place times the impact. And the event that we're talking about is actually getting infected, because I might get infected at any point in time, and then something would happen to me. Now, firstly, let's have a look at the background risk, the risk in our environment. This is the risk in South Africa. These are the number of cases. At the top left, the hospital admissions, the patients in ICU, and the new deaths per million. And you can clearly see there are downward trends towards Omicron, where there's almost no death in the fifth wave. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's the little fifth wave that we've already had. That must be BA4, 5, or something to that effect. But let's put this in perspective. If we were to have a population, which is this large circle, then this inner circle, this circle on the inside of the large circle, that's the infected number of people. Almost 98% of South Africa has been infected already. So we can almost assume, for all practical intents and purposes, the whole population has been infected. This little ellipse over here is the number of cases we've had in South Africa. These were cases that we've measured using the controversial PCR test. The hospitalizations is that little one over there, and that little dot inside there, that's the number of fatalities that we've had. That's only 100,000 people. So what does that mean in a population of 60 million? And I'll talk a little bit about the absolute and the relative risk reduction just now. So this is in perspective. So now we have the likelihood of being infected is almost 100% because the whole population has been infected. What is the impact of being infected? Well, hospitalizations about 500,000 people and fatalities about 100,000 people. Now, if we look at the fatalities, we're looking at 0.17% of the population over the total 2.5-year period, over 2020 up to where we are today. So that's 0.17 over the total period, which is less than 0.08% per year. All right, so that is 0.08% per year. Right, now bearing that in mind, that is the background or the absolute risk if we want to talk about the environment posing a risk. All right, so we've described the risk as the likelihood to get infected, and then the outcome of that infection being a fatality or a hospitalization. And we'll use these values or these measurements as we go along. Right, so what does it mean in practice? Well, I'm working at organization A, and this ties in with what Gerhard has said. I'm spending 25% of my time at the organization, and we call this period where I'm being exposed to the virus as the hazardous exposure. So I'm 25% of my time I'm spending at my workplace and 75% elsewhere. So someone needs to explain to me and to us all how can we manage 75% of our exposure in the Pick and Pay, the Spar, the church, and everywhere by imposing heavy mandates in the 25% part, yeah, if we don't stop infection, because we spoke about infection being the risk event. So if we don't stop infection, why are we doing, why are we talking about a workplace risk if it's not a workplace risk? I'm spending 75% elsewhere of my time, and I'm being more exposed in my home from studies done in Northern Europe, spending more time in my home being exposed to someone very closely, exposed to the virus. For everybody in my home has been walking around virtually everywhere, spending time, in their closed groups and bringing that virus back home. So the home is the more, is the more likely place I would actually get the infection as opposed to the workplace. So the mandates don't make sense really in this context. But if we look at the consequence, now you see approximately 99.7% of our people survive this thing. Let that sink in, 99.7% at worst. It's actually more than that. And that little line on the side there, that one line there, that's 0.17. Those are the people that have succumbed over a 2.5-year period. Now, not taking away the seriousness of this the virus, we're not taking that away at all. But let's just put things in perspective in order to understand how serious this thing really is. So now we have to now stand back and we have to say, all right, but is this everybody? So what does our population look like? So that population of 60 million people is made up of according to a population pyramid, is made up of different ages. And now we talk about the different ages. So here's the population pyramid, not the population pyramid, the age stratified mortality. So this means that if I'm 80 years, I'm more likely to succumb, which is a natural event, sadly, but that is true. We all have a limited life. But if I'm 0 to 20 or 20 to 30 years old, then I'm very unlikely to get, to succumb. I'm very unlikely to die from the virus. So we have to bring this or these graphs into consideration when we talk about the population, because if we start mandating any treatment, we have to look at the impact of the risk, which is what we're seeing in front of us, and the impact of the mitigation risk, the risk we're introducing through the treatment. Now let's have a look. So 0 to 20 years in South Africa is 32 out of 1 million people, of whom at least 3 out of 4, according to most popular, well, not most popular, but scientific research, 3 out of 4, so 75%, will have comorbidities, 3 or more. In other words, the people are actually predisposed. They have a highly likely chance of getting infected. They have a highly likely chance of succumbing to the virus, according to the research. but not more, and more so than a healthy person. So if we look at the healthy population, then, these values look a little bit different. But let's look at everybody in the population from the South African research. There's 32 out of 1 million people, and in the Omicron, 18 or less. This was the 4th wave. The 5th wave will be less than this. So this is 18 out of 1 million people who might actually die from being exposed to the virus. So that is, in other words, being infected and then dying from the virus. So worldwide, we also see new cases rising, but we see the hospital admissions coming down, the patients in ICU coming down, and the new deaths coming down. So in other words, the risk is declining, the environmental risk. Right, so what happens now? Now we have mitigation risk that we introduce. So we say, all right, we want to save people. Now we're going to introduce a treatment. And the treatment, in this case that we're talking about, is the COVID-19 vaccine. What are the risks that we're introducing? And here I went and I had a look at the CDC's own data, the European Medicines Agency, their data, Pfizer's own data, the Canadian Public Health data, the German Federal Institute for Vaccines and Biomedicines data, and South African, our very own data. Now, the mortality rate per, for vaccination, if I were to have 1 million doses administered, then 25 people would die from that, according to the CDC. They would say that these values have not been validated, but they've published them. The EMA says 12%. Pfizer's own data, that rather controversial study they've done, 24%. They don't call it a study; they call it just there's not even a trial. They call it it's a post-marketing post-marketing exercise. 24. The German Federal Institute for Vaccines and Biomedicines, and this is actually fairly reliable. This value here is 17%, which is 17 out of 1 million, 0.0017%, 17 out of 1 million. And SAPRA says we way gone. People in South Africa are much different. We don't really die in South Africa from the vaccines. So it's a little bit of an outlier when we look at these, and that's all I can say. I can't say why or how, but this value does not align with these values over here in terms of mortality. In terms of adverse events, that would be 580 people, almost 1,000 people per million, 510. And again, you can do the calculations. So these values here, 0.17% of the total number of people that received the vaccines in Germany had events, notable events, and 0.02% is serious. And we'll have a little look at this a little bit later, the 0.02% as well, because these values look small. I mean, what is 25, 0.0025? What is 25 in a million? Well, if only 20 people in a million would die from COVID, then giving people a medicine that might potentially kill 25 means that I'm worse off afterwards. Why would I do that? So let's have a look at how these values play out when we compare the different rates. So this is the German data, and this is actually quite interesting, because what they said is, and I've placed a list of serious illnesses or serious effects on the side, so you can see what it looks like. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I'm going to ask Dr. Stephen or Dr. Herman to tell me a little bit more about this, but these things look pretty serious to me. Myocarditis, okay, the anaphylactic reactions, myocardial infarction, seizures, pericarditis. But if you take all these things and you add them up, you get about 0.2%, 0.2 per 1,000. So that is actually 0.02%, right? So that is 200 very serious cases. And what are they made up of? Well, 1% would actually die from all cases. That's 17 in a million. That's the 0.0017 you saw from the German data. But look at this. Disabling, long-lasting, or potentially irreversible adverse events is 4%. So that is 4 times more than this. So we've got almost 80 people that would not recover, that would be disabled. Right now, that is serious to me, 80 in a million. Recovered is 31, and not recovered at the time of this report, 33%. So we don't know what these outcomes still are going to be. These people are still recovering. They could end up in any of these categories. All right, so they could actually recover. They could have a general condition that is not recovered. They could actually belong to the 4%. And I would actually allocate this 33% according to these, ratios. I would actually allocate the 33% into these categories. And then there's still the unknown. So these people have not been, there was no follow-up. So you can see that it's easy to say it's 1% has, of the population has died. But what about these guys? The trial is not over. So these people are still busy, testing the medicine on, because with these values over here, I'm saying this because they would have allocated these into these categories if they had known where they should have gone. And that's just a simple observation that I'm making. All right, so there we are.
Can I just interject there for a moment, because I think this is of great importance what you are showing. And just by the way, I'm sure Stephen will agree, all of these adverse events of special interest are serious. Any one of those conditions, I wouldn't like to have. I don't think anybody would like to have any one of those things. But what this thing is showing us, only the 31% is okay, which means that 69% is not okay. So that means less than a third are all right. The other 2/3, some of them might get better. You don't know how many, but only a third of them are okay.
Yeah, and this is the German published data. Yeah, this is the published data. And there, the date is there. It's 27 December 2020 up to 31st of March 2022. I haven't seen the latest one, but I would love to see how these values evolve over time and then get allocated into the different categories, if we ever do get to see that. Right, so that's the German data. But now, how do we look at risk? So, all right, so the green arrow here tells me that my absolute or baseline, I see I've made a typo there, that my absolute or baseline unmitigated risk, and Stephen, this ties up with your discussion. This is 0.17%. We're reducing the 0.17% by 90%. All right, so at best, we can do 0.17%. That's at best. And it's probably going to be 0.16%. So we're reducing that by 0.16 from 0.17. But now we're getting told that it's 90% reduction. We get a 90% reduction, but it's only 0.17 that we're getting that 90% reduction for. All right, but nonetheless, so just bear in mind that this is the absolute or unmitigated risk, and that's the values, the environmental or the absolute risk I spoke about. And then we might be introducing some risk by means of the mitigation that we're introducing over here. Now, there are two ways to look at it. The as low as reasonably achievable risk reduction, and the as low as technically achievable risk reduction. If we go for zero COVID, we want to push this thing down to zero risk, and then nobody's going nowhere. Everybody's sitting in their homes, and you're still going to get the virus because it's airborne. The pizza delivery guy is going to bring it to you, and then it might go up again over time. The mitigation, because the risk is not only of dying from COVID, but suicide, not being able to go to a hospital, and so on. So that risk is actually sits in the red arrow over there. If I'm administering a treatment, then that risk, the red one over there, which lifts my mortality or my serious cases, which lifts it up, then that would be because of the treatment. All right. So let's think about this thing. We're reducing the risk with a green arrow, and we're lifting the risk due to the mitigation. And we have these repeated events that Dr. Stephen was talking about. So we've got time over here. And so every 6 months or so, or every 3 months, we need a new treatment. We know that. That's the protocol. We start at 90%, for example, and this is just this is just a hypothetical example. We start at 90% and we go down to, say, 40 or 30%. In a certain period of time. Now we need to get another treatment. We need to be treated again. But every time we get treated, we repeat the risk event. That risk event gets repeated. Right, so just bear in mind that the risk event gets repeated. All right. So that's how we look at this thing. So now we're saying that the treatment is 90% effective, but actually on average, it should be about 70% at best, because we have to take into account both the good and the bad. We can't only say the best. It must be the average of these. All right. So firstly, it could never have been only that value if it wanes. All right. So just bear that in mind. Now, I'm just going to briefly give you these figures because they're important. The green arrow goes down, and I might add a little bit risk, a little bit of risk because of my treatment. In a bad case, I'm adding more risk than what I'm mitigating, and in a totally unacceptable case, I'm only adding risk. Right? Not there's no residual. That's the only risk. I'm just adding risk. The treatment isn't working. But as we look over time, we see that we've got waning effectiveness. So the green arrow becomes a little bit shorter, and the red arrow relative to the green one goes up. And over there, we've got a negative benefit. We've added more risk through the treatment because the effectiveness has gone down over time. So this is as time goes on, the effectiveness becomes less, but my risk of the treatment remains. If we've got repeat treatments, I'm adding on to the first risk. I'm adding some more risk because of my repeat treatments. And that's the previous slide I showed you. We assuming that we're reducing the risk, but now we're adding risk every time. And at some point, the red arrows are going to exceed the green arrows, and we'll be in trouble. And this is what's happened because two things have happened consecutively. The effectiveness has waned, and we added the treatments, the risk of treatments. In other words, this green arrow is becoming smaller. The baseline risk, which is that one over there, is becoming less because we've got Omicron. And the red arrows are going up because we're keeping on treating people with something that we don't know what the final effect is going to be. So the compound effect is a very short green arrow and lots of red arrows. And this is what we need to talk about.
Thank you, Johann.
Right. Yep. So I'll just wrap up. The benefit risk, and that's what we need to talk about. What is the benefit risk of using this the treatment? And I'm going to skip the alpha one. If I'm 0 to 20 years old, and I'm counting the number of deaths from COVID and the number of potential deaths, and I'm not saying that's a final number, from the treatment. For every one person I'm saving, I will be sacrificing an individual. That's what the values tell us. That's what these figures tell us. For every 25 that I might save, I have to sacrifice 25. And these values over here were calculated using the values or the published figures from Pfizer and from research that we've done that's been published. So in the best case, we've got 70 to 80 years old. We're saving 175 people for every one we will sacrifice. So that's now sort of on the average. Now I need to ask, who are we sacrificing? Do we select? Do we choose? So, who chooses who we're going to sacrifice? If there's a mandatory policy, nobody gets to choose. But if I have these odds in front of me, then I have the choice whether I need to sacrifice myself for the greater good, but show me the odds. And that's what this benefit risk tells us. So we can go through these and talk a little bit more, but I think that's the end of my presentation for now. And I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Johann. Yeah, that is fascinating. Can I jump right in, Anneke?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to start here with I'm just going to show you a share screen on a particular slide I want to show. Yeah. So these are slides that I prepared, and I'm going to make them available to you. But why I'm showing it to you right now is you see that I am three things. I'm a neurosurgeon, medical legal practitioner, and a mediator. And each of those is relevant to the points I want to make now very briefly. First of all, as a neurosurgeon, in spite of the fact that many litigants and lawyers have asked me to provide expert reports and affidavits and evidence in court cases the experts appointed by the state or the corporates or the universities have all said that I'm not an expert because I'm not a virologist or I'm not a vaccinologist. I'm not even an immunologist. So therefore, I know absolutely nothing about these complicated medical issues. Well, I readily admit that. The funny thing to me is that the actual expert virologists, vaccinologists, and immunologists in South Africa, where are they? Why are they not telling us the obvious truth? And quite frankly, these issues that we are talking about are so simple. They are so simple based on just ordinary medical education. What I was taught in the 1970s was enough to teach me that you don't have to have that specialist knowledge. So these facts about COVID and about the vaccines or so-called vaccines are so simple that even a neurosurgeon can understand them. And if a neurosurgeon can understand them, I'm sure that every one of you can also understand them. Secondly, the fact that I am a medical legal practitioner, I have spent many, many years writing reports and giving evidence in court about personal injuries, claiming for damages from personal injuries. So I understand that business very well. But also, unfortunately, there's this horrible thing of medical negligence all around the world and in South Africa. And I also have to write reports on colleagues who have been accused of being negligent. Sometimes the accusations are frivolous and other times they are genuine. But it's a very unpleasant aspect of medical legal practice is to evaluate claims of medical negligence. And what I am starting to get more and more worried about is, as Ricky Erasmus said earlier in the chat, the tide is turning. As Stephen was showing, as Gerhard explained, as Johann has shown, the more information that becomes available, the more and more it becomes apparent that these injectables against SARS-CoV-2 are not working and they are causing harm. Now, what happens when a doctor advises or prescribes or gives an injection of poison to a patient and the poison harms the patient for no benefit? Then the patient can claim compensation for medical negligence. And I'm very worried about how many of our colleagues are going to be charged with medical negligence claims. Now, some of them maybe have innocently just followed the authorities who they believed they had the right to follow. But quite honestly, if any of them do get charged in future, they will not be able to provide any defense based on science. In other words, they will not be able to prove that the vaccines were good or that they served a valid purpose or that they were safe. So the only defense that will be open to one of our colleagues facing a medical malpractice claim will be, I didn't know. Now even Fauci said that the other day. And what is it? So the lady in America in charge of the White House vaccine committee, Burks, she said when she was challenged to say, but you told us the vaccines would prevent people from spreading the virus. Now we know it's not so. Why did you tell us that? She said, oh goodness, we hoped it would. And they asked her, but did you know? No, we didn't have any studies, so we didn't know. We just hoped that. And then today, I saw an even a greater admission from her, from the same Burks. Not that we hoped it. We actually knew at the time it wouldn't prevent the transmission, but we didn't want to tell the people that because then we thought they wouldn't want to take the vaccine. And we thought they should take the vaccine because we expected it would prevent serious illness and death. So in other words, that's an admission that we lied to them. I saw today a little video clip of Fauci, who was challenged with fertility issues and miscarriage issues. And Fauci said, yes, that is a serious problem. We need to do studies about that.
Study some more.
And And the television reporter, that was Tucker Carlson, said more studies. So in other words, when Fauci told everybody, you've got to get vaccinated and pregnant women must be vaccinated, young women and men of childbearing age must get vaccinated because it's safe, it has got no effect on fertility, they told us, he actually didn't know. He was just guessing or hoping or lying. So an honest GP who believes what he's told by the authorities may get away with the excuse of ignorance. I don't think universities or chief health officers of corporates or the government can get away with the defense ignorance. And so why I'm raising this is to say to you, if there's any doctor that you like, but who doesn't know how dangerous vaccines are, please give them this information so they can think about it and prepare themselves so that they are less at risk in future. And in the same way that Gerhard Papenfus has been advising the businessmen, the owners of businesses, the employers of his association of many thousands of businesses, not to impose vaccine mandates on their staff. If there's anybody running a business making decisions to want to vaccinate their staff, please give them this information, because it's not only the doctors that are going to be charged with clinical negligence. Corporates and employers are going to be charged for compensation for the harm they've caused by forcing people to be vaccinated without informed consent. So there's my medico-legal practitioner 2 cents. Now, you see, I'm also a mediator. And in mediation, I've learned that one of the most powerful ways to change minds, especially when minds are made up blindly without access to information, is not to argue, but to ask questions. And so therefore, I have prepared a number of questions for your benefit. These are all questions. As soon as Gerhard gets us into a public debate with Discovery, I'm asking them these questions. As soon as I get into a CCMA tribunal hearing about an employer, I'm going to ask the opposing side these questions. And when we get into court, I'm going to ask these questions. And there's no problem with the opposing elements knowing of the questions in advance. It will actually be a good thing, because then they can think about the answers and they might decide to cave before actually coming to a tribunal or a court. So what I've prepared here are questions that I would ask anybody who advises me to get a vaccine. And you see what I've labeled it, questions for vax pushers. You know that some of us are labeled incorrectly as anti-vaxxers because actually we are pro-human rights and pro-health. But the people who promote vaccines are vax pushers. Now, these things are not really vaccines. So I've written here in big letters with underlines what they really are. If anybody disagrees with me about a description, I'd like to know why. But these things which are being pushed on us as vaccines are in fact SARS-CoV-2 viral mRNA or viral DNA, spike protein inducing injectables. So there are things that are injected into human beings which contain viral mRNA or viral DNA, and those injections induce the human to produce SARS-CoV-2 spike protein. So that's what they really are, and that is how I'm referring to them. And that includes in South Africa the Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca. So this whole thing goes about this topic. Now, the first issue that one wants to ask people questions about relates to trust. So the first question that one should ask anybody who advises vaccination is, do you have any conflicts of interest? Now, interestingly, medical academics and should know very well what conflicts of interest mean, but it appears to me that a lot of people don't actually know what that means, because I've seen court papers by people who I know have got conflicts of interest, who just state there in their affidavits under oath I have no conflicts of interest. Fortunately for them, they've not yet come under cross-examination or judgment, but that is stated in their affidavits. So if you don't know what a conflict of interest means, then the following two questions are relevant. Do you derive any personal benefit from your vax-pushing assertions? And personal benefit may relate to financial benefits or employment benefits. And next, what is your relationship to the pharmaceutical industry? So once a person has answered those questions, you at least know who you're talking to. And you can form a view as to whether you should or shouldn't trust their opinions. Having established that, the next thing to know about the person you're talking to is, are you talking to a person who has got giving you their own knowledge, or are they telling you something in blind faith of somebody else's knowledge? So we must establish that. So we ask the person, are your assertions based on your own knowledge, gained from your own factual scientific analysis or research, or are you relaying the opinion of somebody else? Now, we know many people, I'm sure corporate executives would answer the question, you're relaying the opinion of somebody else, whereas many others, and we know their names, would say, no, it's their own opinions. And that's fine. It doesn't matter how they answer, because the options are here. If the opinions are not your own, we go to the next slide. If they are your own, you skip the next slide and go to the ones after that. So for the ones who say that it's not their own opinions, those are these. That means they are deriving the opinions as blind faith. That means they are nothing more than a spokesperson. The questions are these. As we now know that your assertions are not based on your own knowledge, would it be fair to view your opinions as those of a spokesperson? Yes or no? Of course, if not, why not? Now, whose opinions are you relaying to others? Is it the WHO? Is it SAPRA? Is it Zopachla? Is it Cyril Ramaphosa? Is it Professor Kari? Whose opinions are you conveying? Thank you. Are you aware that more than 17,000 qualified professionals disagree with you? Now, you will notice that this is the first fact I'm stating on these slides. Everything else on these slides has been a question. So because I'm stating a fact here, I will prove that fact. Here's the proof. Do you see on the share screen physician's declaration? Stephen, can you see that? Okay, they can see it. So this was in October 2021. Over 17,000 doctors and scientists have signed the Rome Declaration. And there's the Rome Declaration. There are the pictures of the leaders of the Rome Declaration. There are the names of a whole lot of others, but it's not the whole 17,000. And I know many doctors and scientists in South Africa who disagree with those opinions, whose names are not here, which is why I can say there are more than 17,000 qualified professionals who disagree with you. So now my question is this: have you posed the questions on the following slides to those who you seem to follow in blind faith? If so, what were their answers? If not, why not? Why did you just accept their opinion blindly without asking them these sensible questions? And will you please do so and then provide us with their answers? So now we go to, we've done with the spokesperson people, the blind faith lot. So let's go to the experts. The experts are the ones who assert that they formed the opinions on the basis of their own knowledge. Therefore, they're declaring themselves as experts. So as we now know that your assertions are based on your own knowledge, gained from your own factual scientific analysis or research, and I'm only going to ask questions in relation to two aspects. There are many more, but I'm just going to focus on these two aspects: safety and efficacy. And we've heard over and over this mantra: the COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Everybody says it. Okay, so my first question, what do you mean when you assert that they are safe? Because it can have many meanings. And then, what do you mean when you assert that they are effective? Because that can also have many meanings. I've actually never heard then anybody specify what they mean. But that's what I think we have a right to know. And I would like to know from any expert that meets me what they mean by these things. So we're going to deal. Do you mean 1, 2, 3, or 4? Do you mean that they cause no harm whatsoever? Because if they don't cause harm at all, then I would agree they're safe. Secondly, do you mean they cause so little harm that it does not matter? In which case you must obviously motivate why it doesn't matter and why it's so small. Or do you mean they cause less harm than the alternative, which would also be reasonable if they do cause less harm than the alternative? Or do you mean something else? So I'm just inviting them to explain which of those alternatives they mean by saying the vaccines are safe. Now, having asserted what you mean by safe, please disclose for whichever answer you gave the facts or scientific basis for your conclusion. So if you said no harm whatsoever, where was your data? What was your methodology? What were your findings? What did you refer to? What class of studies did you look at? Was it, if you look at, remember Stephen Schmidt's pyramid, was it class 1 evidence or class 4 evidence or class 5 evidence with respect to each of these? But now specifically, if you claim that they cause less harm than the alternative, and this is what I anticipate the majority of them will say, that they cause less harm than the alternative, then I've got more specific questions for you. So they go to the next slide. So there it is. You are an expert who's telling me from your own knowledge that the mRNA injectables are safe because they cause less harm than the alternative. So the question is, please disclose what alternative or alternatives you have taken into account. So does it mean getting vitamin D as the alternative, or does it mean not having a vaccine as the alternative, or does it mean having a different kind of treatment as the alternative, or does it mean ivermectin, or does it mean natural immunity? Because there are many alternatives to being vaccinated. So when you say that it causes less harm than the alternative, you have to say what alternative you mean. And here we then come finally to the question that none of them will be able to answer, which is Professor Johann Holm's forte. Please disclose the facts, methodology, and findings of the risk-benefit analysis that you conducted. Now, we know from labor legislation that any company that wants to impose workplace safety instructions or mandates or whatever has to conduct a risk-benefit analysis. But none of them have, because they can't. Because when it is done, as Johann Holm showed us, when he conducts a risk-benefit analysis, he finds, oh, goodness me, the risks outweigh the benefits. So, however, whoever the knowledgeable expert is that tells you that the vaccines are safe because they cause less harm than the alternative, you want to know, you want to see their risk-benefit analysis. And I challenge any one of them to give that to you. Okay, we're nearing the end of this. We get on to a few questions about effectiveness. You've told us you're an expert. When you say they're effective, what are the beneficial effects to which you refer? So they're effective to do what? Do you mean that they effectively prevent transmission of the virus? Or do you mean they effectively protect people from getting positive PCR tests? In which case, why should I bother whether my PCR test is positive or negative? Or do they protect people from getting the COVID-19 illness? Because those are two very different things. Or do you mean that they effectively protect people from severe illness or death? So which of these potential protections are you really referring to when you say this? If you say the last thing, because this is what is now in vogue, that the media says it, we hear it from the experts all the time, that, oh, sorry, we were wrong when we said it protects transmission and so on, but they're very good against severe illness and death. So that's what we expect them to say. In which case, please go to the next slide. That's here. So you are the expert who said that the injectables are effective at protecting people from severe illness or death. But now there are, of course, questions about that. Do you mean that the protection relates only to severe illness or death from COVID-19? Or do you mean the protection relates to all causes of severe illness or death? Because if you can protect for 2 deaths from COVID-19, but you cause 10 deaths due to heart attacks, you haven't given any protection at all. So what do you mean? Do you mean COVID deaths? Or do you mean all severe illness? And if that is what you mean, what are the findings of the all-cause morbidity mortality studies you have reviewed? Now, I don't know how many people in this meeting have reviewed all-cause morbidity or mortality studies, but every single one that I have found that reviews that, which is the correct endpoint to review, finds that the COVID-19 vaccines or the injectables cause more harm than good, both on morbidity and mortality. So there's my final slide, folks. I do want to show you one more little thing, which is about the South African Constitution. I just want to stop that share. And the reason that this is important is because a lot of people, very clear professors of law, advocates, corporate executives, a lot of people who want to encourage or impose vaccine mandates have argued that they rely on Section 36 of the Bill of Rights of the South African Constitution to impose vaccine mandates. And what Section 36 of the Constitution does, it provides a limitation, the circumstances under which individual rights can be limited. If you see here, there's the South African Constitution. Chapter 2 is the Bill of Rights. And then if you go to Section 36 of that Bill of Rights, which is here, you see there it's a very small piece. It's only about 2/5 of a page. Limitation of rights is Section 36. This is what they rely on to say that they have the right to limit your individual rights in favor of the group rights. But there are 2 very important points here which have been totally misinterpreted. And for the first point, which is a legal point, I thank the CCMA Commissioner Byrne, who wrote a very good judgment or finding in his arbitration. And that relates to this first point under 1, where it says the rights in the Bill of Rights may be limited only in terms of law of general application. Now, law of general application is something that can be passed by the legislature of the South African government. No company or university or anybody else can pass a law of general application. So the authority by the Constitution to limit rights is limited to the authority of the legislative arm of government by passing a law of general application. That is what Byrne pointed out, and it's so clear from this. Then it doesn't say Parliament can just go at its own discretion and limit any right it feels like. It says when the legislature wants to limit a right, that limitation has to be reasonable and justifiable in an open and democratic society based on human dignity, equality, and freedom. And then it specifies 5 provisos, taking into account all relevant factors. That means, and this is what the Constitution, the nature of the right, the importance of the purpose of the limitation, the nature and extent of the limitation, the relation between the limitation and its purpose, and less restrictive means to achieve the purpose. Now, of course, when this was written into the Constitution, they didn't have COVID vaccines in mind. So the language here is the language as it says. You don't see anything there about vaccines. So what I have done is I've prepared this little document in which I've copied there verbatim what the Section 36 of the Constitution says. There are its restrictions or its provisos, A, B, C, D, and E. And if you look at those, you will find that in the context of COVID vaccination, all of those are medical issues. They're not legal issues. And to rephrase those 5 criteria in terms of COVID vaccines, here's my rephrasing. First of all, the rights which people are infringed are the rights to health, dignity, integrity of body and mind, freedom of choice and informed consent. All of these are rights guaranteed in the Constitution. The B proviso in COVID terms is the importance or otherwise of COVID-19 vaccines for the health of individuals and the health of society. In other words, do we need vaccines at all, or isn't it a big enough problem? Thirdly, the safety or otherwise, i.e. the risk-benefit ratio. Fourthly, the effectiveness or otherwise. And fifthly, are other less restrictive means available? Now, each one of those, the first point A is a legal point because it's human rights. But points B, C, D, and E are all medical factual issues. No law professor or judge can make findings on this without medical or factual evidence. Now, in January this year, I released a report in which I analyzed all of these in terms of data available at that time. And in that report, I found that vaccine mandates in South Africa would fail on each one of these 5. That report stands, it is available on my website. Anybody can use it, and its findings are very clear. Yeah. Now, only thing is that at that stage in January, on this point D, the effectiveness or otherwise, the data that was available then proved that it was not effective at preventing transmission or catching COVID. But there was a modest benefit in terms of severe illness and death. Not a very big one, but there was a modest benefit. Then, on 24 March, and with more data all around the world being available, I released a further report which was limited to that point D, the effectiveness of COVID. And on the basis of evidence that was available by the 24th of March, I found that there was no benefit to severe illness or death from the COVID vaccines. So to come back in a very down-to-earth, plain, ordinary way, not the academic, mathematical, and proper way that Professor Holm has done his risk-benefit analysis, but just op die boere manier, plain common sense. If these vaccines don't work, which the evidence shows they don't, if you go look for 6 months or more, they don't have any beneficial effect. The only beneficial effect is limited to a short space of time. If they don't work, but they do have harms, what does that mean? The risk-benefit analysis for anybody is all risk for no benefit. Thank you very much.